Commerce and Economic Development. It is Friday, April 28th, 2023. At looks like 10:27 in the morning. We're just back from the core session. So we're back to take a look at a new draft of H81. We have our legislative counsel, David Hall, with us. If you'd like to join us.
Happy to.
Good morning.
Looking at Representative Williams and realized that I failed to put the findings into this draft.
Well, that's something we'll talk about too.
Okay.
Only crying on the inside.
I'm sure you've done it first.
Must be it leaked out a little bit, Jonathan. You picked up on it right away.
I saw the sadness in your face. I'm sorry.
Sad smile.
And sorry about that. David Hall, Legislative Council, we're looking at H81, yes? My history. On your committee page, there should be a new draft.
Yes.
And at this point, you probably know the drill. The highlighting reflects changes. This thing is being grumpy with me. Relative to our last time together. So I'm going to pull that up. I assume you want me to share this on the screen, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Right? Just don't care about this stuff. Excuse me. I really go through this process of navigating to it live feed every day, just so that, you know, everybody learns how to do it for themselves. Eventually they won't even need me.
Well, with the advent of AI.
Shots fired on there.
Speaking of which, I have a confession. ChatGPT wrote this bill.
Joking.
That is, he's being facetious.
All right. So this is a committee strike all amendment. So I just repopulated the whole bill. I don't know that we've had an amendment yet with instances of amendment in this committee together. Have you guys even had the benefit of seeing that? Okay. Anyway, I did this one as a strike all. It's just easier to read all together. So you'll see the first couple of changes here in 9 VSA 4051-1 agricultural equipment. So I just decided to use the double underlines for the new stuff and highlights. So it will be used principally off-road for an agricultural purpose, including a tractor trailer or combine and other equipment principally associated with livestock or crop production, horticulture, floriculture. The Colorado law has more detailed and nuanced exceptions for, you know, passenger vehicles, airlines or airplanes or aerial vehicles. I'm not sure anybody would have intended that. I guess you could have had crop dusting. But I hope this conveys and is consistent with your intent. Trying to avoid trucks, automobiles, things that are really mostly for the road, right? The next change is on page 2 in the definition of documentation. And the additional language really is just sort of to round out the space between the House Ag version and the Colorado version. So Colorado has said whether in an electronic or tangible format, the OEM provides to an authorized repair provider to assist with the services of. So this is not identical to Colorado, but it's what's basically what's missing from Colorado, from the Vermont definition relative to Colorado. Next changes are going to be on page 4. So trade secret, this repopulates the definition we already have in statute, 9 VSA 4601. It is the Uniform Trade Secrets Act that's consistent across most jurisdictions. We don't have to do it this way. We could incorporate it by reference to Title IX. To the different section in Title IX. We're already in Title IX. It's up to you. Frankly, I usually find it's zero additional effort to just use the words rather than the cross-reference. And that way you don't have to go find the other definition. Zoom gave up. Let's try again. Okay. So the part that is not part of the Trade Secrets Act and certainly not part of 9 VSA 4601 is the new material that's stricken here that House Ag had added. And we've consensus around the table to just let that go. So that is out. Turn to 4052. The changes in 4052, I think it's fair to characterize them as a shift from a substantially the same terms and then some basis for deviation from those terms. That's one paradigm, that's model A. And then the other is just basically what's fair and reasonable negotiated between the parties. And so I'd say the changes in 4052 represent a shift from the former to the latter. Consequently, we'll strike the material at the top of page 5. In 3, we'll say an OEM may make parts, tools, and documentation available to an independent repair provider or owner through an authorized repair provider that consents to sell or make available parts, tools, or documentation on behalf of the manufacturer. It's not really all that different from what was there before. Before it said either directly or through a provider if the agreement allows for it. That was written in Ag to respond, frankly, to the concern that they didn't want an authorized dealer to be forced to participate in this market. And I think, this is more, it's not that much different, but it's more reflective of the concern that we do want them to be able to sell to independents. We do want manufacturers to be able to run that business through their dealers, which is the typical business model now. So any questions on 3 concerns? Moving on to terms and limitations. So under the terms governing the sale or provision of parts, tools, documentation, OEM shall not impose on an independent repair provider or owner. The yellow language, I've double underlined and flagged yellow because it's new to this prefatory subsection B heading, right? But it actually appeared already below. You'll see in lines 10 and 11. So, discussing concerns from interested stakeholders, there was a concern, the purpose of B is to avoid this, them throwing up, guardrails, roadblocks, annoyances, unreasonable burdens that would just discourage independents and owners from availing themselves of this opportunity. But I think you heard, or we heard, that from the manufacturer's perspective, You know, what if it's weather, or what if there's some other burden they don't even have control of? And that wasn't really the point of B. The point of B, and the reason I move these words up, is to make clear that what we're talking about here is some additional cost or burden that isn't necessary. And I added the language in B. You tell me if it's consistent with what you want to see. I said within the ordinary course of business. That's a phrase that pops up. It's not much better than fair and reasonable, but most of this is going to be subjective between parties and between courts or the AG if it gets to that point. So we really look at, is this reasonably necessary within the manufacturer's ordinary course of business, or is designed to be an impediment on the independent repair provider or owner, including, and then it does still have the components here, a substantial obligation to use or restriction on the use of the stuff, condition that you become an authorized repair provider, requirement that you basically pre-register or get pre-approval from the OEM before you can even use it. That's 3, and that's specific to the OEM parts tools documentation. We don't want you to have to pre-register that. We want you to just be able to buy it and use it. And 4, some additional burden or material change that affects the timeliness or the method of delivering the parts. So sure, you can have it, but it's going to be 12 weeks. That's not going to help anybody. So on the costs in subsection C, this is pared back. And again, the changes here are to reflect that we're not talking about substantially the same cost with, the opportunity to increase that if and only if there's some reason to increase the cost, like we have to ship it further or expand our, facility or something like that. We're just going to say OEM offer parts, tools, and documentation at a cost that is fair to both parties, considering the conditions, quality, and timeliness of delivery. It does not discourage or disincentivize repairs to be made by an owner or independent repair provider. This is more akin to the Colorado model in language, and really puts the onus on the parties to negotiate the price. So what happens if things go wrong? It's a negotiated agreement to buy, sell, trade until it's not. And if, I suppose one person or enough people get upset that this is not happening, then they go to the AG's office and they say, we're getting stonewalled here and we think it's a violation of law. And it'll be up to the AG to look at 4053 enforcement, which is unchanged. It's a Consumer Protection Act violation. I want to note 4053 applies to a person who violates a provision of this chapter. And that's going to matter in the next piece, the next change, subsection C. We're adding this new element that speaks to independent repair providers and owners. And this is from the Colorado language. I've slightly modified it to make it an affirmative prohibition. You shall not modify agroforestry equipment to deactivate a safety notification system except as necessary to provide services. Access any function of a tool that enables the independent repair provider owner to change the settings for a piece of equipment in a manner that brings the equipment out of compliance with any applicable law, safety or emissions law, except as necessary to provide services, evade emissions, copyright, trademark, or patent laws, or engage in any other illegal equipment modification activities. So again, pairing that with the enforcement piece, I will say by the letter of the law, it is possible that an independent repair provider or an owner could violate this chapter and violate the Consumer Protection Act, in addition to other potential violations. For instance, if you do something that violated the Clean Air Act, or I don't know what other law. So be aware of that. And lastly, the effective date is changed to push it out to January 1st, 2025.
So in general, I like a lot of the changes. I have a couple of questions. I was looking at section limitations. Where's that? Going too fast here. Yeah. So the limitations and then the cost, terms limitations, yep, the bottom, line 16, page 5. And then also the cost limitations on page 6 seem to be pretty much duplications, just said differently. I'm not necessarily opposed to it because they don't contradict each other. But I don't know, in my reading, it just seems to be, the piece that was concerning to me that is fixed in the cost part is designed to be an impediment for the, under the terms limitations. And you can design something to be a, I don't know, a benefit to a dealer and not an impediment to an independent repair shop, right? So it's design, the design is just, so the design would be the focus. But I think that under cost, so it says, does not discourage or disincentivize repairs to be paid by an owner independent repair provider. So it's those, they're written a little bit differently. I like the language on does not discourage or disincentivize. I feel like that's a little bit more what we're trying to say, but you know, essentially they're the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think B speaks to terms, so we, you know, whatever is in a contract or an agreement or just a sale that is not necessarily the price of the item versus C, the cost. We're really talking about what is the price? What are you charging?
Sure.
But I agree with you. It wouldn't be hard to collapse B and C into one subsection that just addressed costs and terms. And I agree with you totally that the sentiment is the same.
Yeah.
We don't want
Not
additional
necessarily
burden.
opposed. I just want to make sure that we're not creating within there a workaround, right? Like that's my concern. And
I hear you. I think it's actually over prescriptive rather than under, but that's my.
Great. Excellent. My understanding under the repair piece, under C at the very end on page 8, where we added that, which again, I like that, that's really helpful for me, that occasionally you have to temporarily deactivate a system in order to provide services. So is that clear, right? Is except as necessary to provide services clear that this would just be a temporary deactivation or a temporary modification? And it would be required to go back to the proper system at the end, right? Like, and is that done through 3 and 4? Right, that in the end,
Yeah.
the system has to be whole.
So I would read 1 and 2 when we say it's necessary to provide services, then that's the scope. So if it's necessary to temporarily do it, that's all you can do. If it's necessary to have it out of commission until the repair is complete, and then you have to reinstate it, doing whatever you need to do to reboot the system, get it back into working order, then that's what's necessary. But that's really that's the scope of the prescription here, is that you can only do these things to the extent they are necessary to provide the service that you're performing.
Yeah, so I don't know if we need the line that says nothing in this section, you know, shall be, right? Shall be an allowance to,
Yeah,
right, like, you know, the language.
I do.
And I'm not.
I typically, it's a good question, and it comes up all the time because other states, even our state, sometimes think that way. I prefer to avoid those constructs, the construct like nothing in this section shall be construed. I'd rather use the active and either say you shall or may do something, or you shall not do something, and that makes it a little bit clear of who has the duty and what is the duty.
So if it's, like I said, if it's covered in 3 and 4, then I'm good with it. I just want to make sure that it is. So, and the last thing is, I don't love that we're pushing this out till January of 25. I think, January of 24 or some other date in 24.
Problem is that this isn't going through this year.
Right.
Oh, so it has
It's
to.
gonna go through next year. And actually, January of 25 might be too early, we don't know. We'll have to understand, I think we'll have a better understanding next year of how all of this is moving forward as far as the manufacturers are going.
Okay, then I'm good. Thanks.
There was a proposal that we had in July, but we
Yep.
moved it back to January.
And I think that discussion can be had next year.
Yeah.
Whether that, you you might need that extra 6 months. It's gonna depend on how things are moving.
Yeah, whether we could do it in July of 23, 24 or January 25.
Well, or push it
July
to
25.
for July of
Yeah,
25.
that's sorry, that's it.
It's gonna depend on
Okay,
how
so
all of this stuff is.
Because there is implementation needed on the OEM side.
great.
Things need time to wrap up
Thank you.
after the law is in the books.
Jonathan?
Have we, Mr. Chair, have we entered the discussion generally amongst the committee on this?
Or we
I
just
have no
talk
questions for
language?
David.
Well, I think we're looking at language and then we need to look at the intent and purpose language.
I like it.
Take a look at this and then, any questions on the language? Everybody's good, then just ask David to want to drop in that intent language and we'll take a look at that. We have it done and go through that and see where we can get that. And I'm not intending to move this today. I want to give everyone that's on the side of the room the opportunity to look at the language over the weekend and come back to us on Tuesday, but my intent will be to move this on Tuesday. So no further questions.
I guess I do have, I want to see intent language. I think it's covered on page 2 in documentation. But I guess just, David, for you, one of our interns was pointed out this morning that in the MOUs, they specifically call out the ability for OEMs to like lock the software and lock people out of, forms of the software. And it feels like to me it's covered under, the intern just made note of the fact that that's covered in the MOUs and it doesn't seem to be explicitly covered here. I feel like it is in 3 or in other places. I was curious for your thoughts on that.
Are you referring to this,
Yeah. I think it is. It seems pretty clear it is. I thought it was an interesting, if there's some other part of the MOU that's more clear than that language.
I'm to do what? I'm not sure what the action is. What do you?
Yeah, I guess I don't know either. I thought it was pretty clear. I felt like that was if there's in other parts of the MOU, if they make it more clear than that language that we have that the OEM has to unlock the software in specific ways.
It seems to me lines 8 through 11 are directly speak to that. But if there's a different concern that this doesn't address, I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, no, I think it's fine.
I was just wondering, is there a chance to hear from like the people on the
That's what
sideline?
we're gonna do Tuesday.
We can't do it this morning.
I want to give, I think Bridget needs to make sure that this just came out this morning. I think her clients need to be able to look at it in order to reply. I don't know, I mean, unless they have time and can reply by this afternoon, but I'm assuming they probably don't. So I want to make sure that they have time, that Christina has time to have those discussions, that everybody has time to look at it. And, yeah, it'd be great to move it, but I want to make sure everybody has time to digest it. If there's comments, questions, other thoughts, then we should get those. We've come this far. So I think a couple of extra days won't matter too much. Of course, we still have the intent language we have to take a look at as well, and probably so I think that's what we will do with our time today, is work on that intent language. I'm sure it's probably near perfect coming from Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sure we won't have to make much changes. So David, if you'd like to put that together, and when you're ready, we'll come back to it.
Sure. I mean, that won't take long.
Okay.
I can clean this up and
Okay. As soon as you're done, we'll come back and go